when you think about ancient Egypt, your mind probably goes straight to, the pyramids, the golden masks, the sheer scale of it all. It's all about grandeur.
Exactly. Unparalleled grandeur.
And if you've ever heard the term temple virgins, the image that probably comes to mind is, that's a romantic one, isn't it?
It is something elegant, spiritual. Maybe you picture something like the Vestal Virgins in Rome, women who were revered, protected, dedicated to a higher cause.
But that image, that assumption, it's a carefully crafted illusion.
It's a monumental myth.
Mm.
It's a piece of propaganda that was so sophisticated, so successful, that it's lasted for more than 3,000 years. The beautiful art, the magnificent temples, the poetic language, all of that was essential camouflage.
Okay, so that's exactly what we're doing in this deep dive. We're going to peel back that comfortable historical facade. The sources we're looking at, they methodically strip away all that beautiful language. They expose this system for what it was. A calculated engine of systematic dehumanization.
And reproductive servitude. Our mission here is to look past that sanitization. The sources show us how the priesthood, immensely powerful, incredibly wealthy at temples like Amun at Karnak, maintained this state-sponsored protocol.
A protocol designed to do what exactly?
To consume the lives of girls and young women, not for spiritual fulfillment, but to create political and religious legitimacy. It was a machine, and it was designed for production.
To really get our heads around the systemic protocol, which, as you said, governed thousands of lives for nearly 3,000 years, we can't start with the big picture, with the statistics.
No, you have to start with the personal.
Yeah.
With the terror.
So we're going to begin with the experience of one girl, Nefertari, right at the moment her life is stolen from her, the moment she becomes property.
And it's so important to understand this from the very beginning. The cruelty we're about to describe. This wasn't a bug in the system. It was the system. It was the procedure, codified and followed by the highest religious authorities in the land.
Okay, let's set the scene. We're at the Temple of Amun at Karnak. I mean, the sheer scale of this place, even today, is designed to make you feel small, to intimidate you.
And for a 9-year-old girl like Nefertari, it would have been just complete sensory overload, disorientation, and you can only imagine just mounting terror.
Their sources paint such a vivid picture of her confusion, her father. He might have been desperate or in debt, or maybe he actually believed the propaganda. He told her this was an honor.
A meeting with the gods.
Exactly. But standing there, you can feel the brutal reality starting to sink in. The sun is just scorching, blinding as it reflects off all the polished stone.
And there's this deep internal breaking happening inside her that's just the complete opposite of the brilliant day outside.
She's standing on this enormous ceremonial patio, and the stones are so hot she can feel the heat burning right through the soles of her sandals.
And her hair. Her hair is braided with flowers. But the source describes them as smelling like death-smelling flowers. It's this scent of decay, a terrible foreshadowing of what's coming.
And then the agent of this erasure appears, the priestess.
Yes. She is described as ancient. Her face is painted this aggressive skull white, and it contrasts with these thick black coal lines around her eyes.
It's a mask.
It's more than a mask. The painting makes her seem, and this is a direct quote, not entirely present, as if she's already transcended being human and is just looking at Nefertari as an object, a thing from another plane of existence.
She basically embodies the cold, procedural nature of the whole system.
Completely. And the men standing behind her, the other priests, they reinforce it. They're silent, their heads are shaved, they're completely still. They're not doing anything, just witnessing, confirming the system's absolute power.
The priestess steps forward. She's holding a bronze razor, and it's polished so brightly that it catches the sun, this terrible flash of light.
And that razor is the instrument of her separation, her erasure. The priestess speaks, and her voice is just utterly devoid of warmth. She just states the reality of it. Today you die. Not your body, but your identity. You are becoming a function.
A function, not even a person.
You will no longer be Nefertari, the daughter of your father. You will be property belonging to Amun.
And then she outlines the ritual itself, the 3 cuttings. It's this precise, systematic process to transform a little girl from a person into an asset.
The destruction is so deliberate. The first cutting is tiny, just a single strand of hair severed.
What does that signify?
It's her removal from the world of men outside the temple, her potential to marry, her family lineage, her entire future outside their control. It's gone. Cut away.
Then the second cutting, this one, removes her from her family, from love.
A whole handful of hair this time. It falls like dark rain, the source says, onto those hot stones, and the priestess just watches it fall. The physical evidence of the severance has to be clear.
And then the third cutting, this is the one that removes her from herself.
Yes, this is when the full shearing begins. It's methodical, it's relentless, there's no emotion to it at all. It's just a task being performed on an object.
And this is the moment, seeing her own identity literally being cut away and falling to the ground, that the 9-year-old girl finally breaks.
She starts to cry, and the source notes that she instantly knew it was a mistake, a dangerous display of individuality.
A mistake that is immediately corrected.
Immediately, the sound of the bronze shears just stops. The air becomes dangerously silent. And the priestess, without even raising her voice, just states the rule, "Servants of Amun, do not cry."
And then the violence.
A swift, brutal blow across Nefertari's face with the flat of her hand. The sound just echoes across that huge empty patio. And the priests watching. They don't move. They don't even flinch.
The silence is the system saying, this is correct, this is the protocol.
The message is driven home. You will not cry. You will not speak unless commanded. You will not resist. You will not show weakness. A tool doesn't have the luxury of tears. And then rough hands, servants' hands, grip her arms to reinforce that she has no physical autonomy left.
The cutting starts again.
Yes. The blade pulls, it catches, it even draws a little bead of blood from her scalp. But the priestess doesn't pause. When it's all gone, when her scalp is bare, the priestess just calmly wipes the girl's blood off the bronze razor.
Chilling.
And then comes the assessment. The priestess examines her bare skull like she's inspecting livestock. And she declares, "You are acceptable, your skull shape is good, your skin is smooth, you will do."
She's acceptable inventory.
She meets the physical requirements for the role. And the process immediately pivots to indoctrination, rebuilding through fear. They lead her away to the inner chambers for training.
And the rules are laid out with specific threats.
Oh, yes. She's told, if you perform correctly, you'll be tolerated. But if you make a mistake, the punishments will be creative, they will be severe, they will be designed to ensure that you never make the same mistake twice. The unpredictability is key.
And she has to adopt the new language of servitude right away. Her old identity, her name, gone.
When she hesitates, she's corrected violently again. She's told, "You'll address me as Holy Mother. You will address all priests as Sacred One." Nefertari, which means beautiful companion, is now obsolete.
She's just learning how to function inside this terrifying new reality.
And the final detail from that day, it's the sound of the massive temple doors closing behind her. The source describes it as stone grinding against stone. She gets one last look at the outside world, the sky, the life she's lost, and then the heavy portal shuts.
And that was the start.
The start of 57 years of being consumed by the system.
That story, that personal horror, it really shows us the human cost. So now we have to zoom out and understand the vast cold mechanism that powered this for centuries.
So we come back to that contrast we started with. The Temple of Amun was, famous for its sophistication, its beauty, its complex rituals.
Right, and you said that elegance wasn't just for show. It was a functional component.
It was absolutely critical. That sophistication, that beauty, is what made the cruelty invisible. If the whole system looks divine, if it looks sacred and traditional, then the systematic exploitation of children starts to look like a religious tradition.
Instead of a massive human rights violation.
Exactly. The aesthetic normalized the horror.
So if we push past the propaganda, what was this machine actually designed to do? What were its core functions?
The sources really point to three. First, the organized extraction of reproductive labor from girls. Second, maintaining a very controlled hierarchy of sexual access for the priests, which was always disguised as divine favor.
And third,
The industrial-scale erasure of individual identity through a crushing daily protocol. And the overall goal was political, to bear children for the gods, because that guaranteed the legitimacy of the priesthood's enormous power.
and this brings us to just how powerful these temples were. We're not talking about some fringe cult. These institutions were arguably the real centers of power in Egypt.
Oh, absolutely. They often eclipsed the pharaoh himself. Think about the wealth. Egyptian temples owned huge tracts of the best farmland. They controlled grain storage, mines. They ran complex taxation systems. Their economic power was just immense.
So to hold on to that kind of power, managing all those assets and people, they needed more than just tradition. They needed divine authority.
Undeniable divine authority. And what's the most tangible, the most indisputable proof that the gods are on your side?
Divine children.
Divine children. offspring that could be presented to the people as proof that the gods literally walked the earth right there through their chosen priests. The temple virgins were the biological and the legal mechanism to produce these legitimizing children on demand.
Without them, the whole power structure starts to look shaky.
It would crumble. Their entire claim to power rested on it.
Okay, now this is a really important point of clarification because people who know a bit about Egyptian history might be thinking of another figure, the god's wife of Amun.
Yes, the Hemet, a very important distinction to make.
How do we separate that role, which was powerful and high status, from the vulnerable girls we're talking about?
They are polar opposites. The god's wife of Amun was an elite political figure, almost always a princess or a queen. She was an institutional leader, managing huge estates and wealth. The temple virgins, or concubines of Amun, as they were sometimes called, were at the absolute bottom of the power spectrum.
They had no status.
None. They owned nothing. They were completely disposable. The god's wife was a manager. The temple virgin was a resource to be consumed.
So this was a codified position, but not a high-status one. It was an administrative role.
Deeply embedded in the religious law and the bureaucracy. And there was a very detailed hierarchy. You had official concubines of Amun, then lower-ranking servants, and then, crucially, there were girls in this legally vulnerable gray zone.
What does that mean, a gray zone?
Their status was deliberately kept ambiguous. Maybe they weren't officially recorded. This lack of any clear legal standing made them even easier to exploit.
So what was their legal status, fundamentally? Were they slaves, priestesses, something else?
The sources categorize it in a really chilling way. A normal wife in Egypt has certain legal protections rights to property, divorce, inheritance. A temple virgin had none of that.
So not a wife?
No. She was, for all intents and purposes, property. The specific term one of our sources uses is both disturbing and concise. She was property that could prey.
Property that could prey. Wow.
And this legal framework was state-sponsored. It allowed the major cults to maintain absolute reproductive and sexual control over this population of girls and women.
So for a system like this to run for thousands of years, it needed a constant supply of new people, a ceaseless flow of human assets.
Which brings us to the recruitment machine.
Which was, I'm guessing, not passive at all.
Not in the slightest.
Yeah.
It was strategic, professionalized. They understood that just marching in and taking girls was, inefficient. It caused disruption. Their preferred method was engineered consent, coercion.
How did that work?
Priests or their agents would travel around, often disguised as merchants or minor officials. And they were looking for two things in a village or town. Youth, yes, but more importantly, a specific exploitable vulnerability.
So it wasn't just about picking the prettiest girl.
Appearance was secondary to vulnerability. They were explicitly targeting families who didn't have the social or economic power to say no.
Like who?
Girls from the absolute poorest families, where resisting the temple could mean the rest of the family starves. They looked for girls whose fathers had died, leaving a mother who was socially isolated and weak. It was cold, calculated selection based entirely on who had the least leverage.
Once a target was picked, the summons would arrive. But it was never framed as a demand.
Never. It was an elaborate piece of theater. It was always presented as this great honor, a gift, an elevation for the family from the god Amun himself.
So it's a sacred commandment, not a kidnapping.
Exactly. The family is told their daughter has been chosen to ensure the divine presence continues on earth. They technically asked for their consent, but it was a formality. It was never a real choice.
But what if a family did resist? What if they actually said no?
Then the temple would deploy these layered consequences. At first, the threats were subtle, economic. Suddenly, the family's land would be under aggressive scrutiny from temple tax collectors. Ruinous demands would appear out of nowhere.
Or their sons couldn't get a job.
Exactly. Sons would find every path to advancement, military, administrative, even artisan guilds, suddenly blocked by some mysterious clerical error. It was bureaucratic strangulation.
But that didn't work.
If the family was really stubborn, the threats became more direct, though always shrouded in some kind of religious ambiguity. The temple records have these oblique references to unfortunate accidents.
What kind of accident?
A son drowning in a canal. A daughter, the one who resisted, dying from a sudden, inexplicable illness, even though temple physicians were supposedly trying to help. This kind of targeted hardship usually broke the family's resistance within a few months.
It sent a message to everyone else, too.
A very clear message about the temple's omnipresent power.
And beyond this coercion, there were even more direct ways into the system. Financial and military pathways.
And this is where it becomes so starkly transactional. Debt settlement. If your family owed the temple a big debt, grain, silver, cattle, you could settle it by giving them your daughter.
And this was legal.
It was fully codified in temple law. The sources even give us the standard exchange rate. A young girl's life was legally equivalent to a specific amount of grain or a certain weight of silver.
So they had a literal price tag on a human life?
Precisely. It's state-sanctioned human trafficking, just dressed up as debt settlement. The daughter wasn't a slave, legally, but a commodity whose transfer erased a financial liability. Her value was purely economic.
And then there's the military angle.
The spoils of war. After a successful military campaign, a certain number of captured women and girls were allocated to the temples as tribute. For them, it was a double erasure.
How so?
First, they're ripped from their own culture, their own people. Then they're immediately consumed by this temple system where their identity is erased all over again. They become just generic property, useful only for ritual and reproduction.
And finally, the most tragic pathway of all.
Desperation. Girls literally abandoned at the temple gates by families who are too poor to feed them. Imagine that choice. Surrender one child to the temple or watch your entire family slowly starve.
And once they were inside, it didn't matter how they got there.
Coercion, debt, conquest, abandonment. The outcome was always the same. A life of absolute captivity, a life to be consumed.
So once a girl was acquired, she entered what you call the anatomy of control. Her daily life was structured with this obsessive precision.
Relentless precision. The goal was to systematically crush any trace of the individual self she once was, to erase Nefertari.
How total was this control? How much of their day was managed?
It began before the sun was even up. The sources say 5 to 6 hours every morning were just for preparation. And we have to see this not as, getting ready for the day, but as an act of surveillance and ownership.
What did that preparation involve?
Intricate, prescribed rules for everything. The specific garments for your rank, the specific ritual hairstyles, the exact way to apply face paint, kohl, ochre, even the precise quantity and arrangement of the jewelry you had to wear.
So the morning ritual wasn't about personal devotion. It was about preparing a surface for display.
It was about preparing an advertisement. The virgin's body was stripped of its identity and became, essentially, a display case for the god's power. By spending hours every morning editing your own body to meet external standards, you are constantly being reminded, this body is not yours, it's a communal asset.
It's a form of psychological disarmament.
Constantly, every single day. And once they were repaired, the rest of the day was meticulously filled with ritual.
Every minute was accounted for.
Every single minute. They moved through the temple in a strict order, performing these ceremonies that demanded absolute physical conformity.
Yeah.
The control was just microscopic. The exact angle to pour a libation, the right rhythm and pitch for a hymn, the required depth of a bow.
And any deviation was dangerous.
Any act of individual expression, a gesture out of place, a personal opinion, it could be seen as disrespect to the god, and it would lead to immediate punishment.
And what was that punishment like? Was it just constant low-level abuse?
No, it was more strategic than that. The sources call it calibrated violence. It wasn't random. It was designed to install a very specific operative kind of fear.
For example?
For a minor infraction, or for questioning a priest, a virgin could be put in isolation, confined for weeks in a dark chamber with just enough food and water to live, but not enough to be strong. Beatings were also routine.
And the goal wasn't just to punish the mistake.
The goal was to make absolute, unquestioning compliance the only rational choice for survival. The system ran on the constant threat of severe, unpredictable consequences. That way, less day-to-day violence was actually needed.
Which brings us to the central horror of the system, the part the temple used the most elaborate language to hide, the sexual exploitation.
The religious language is the most powerful tool of abuse here. A temple virgin existed in this perpetual state of potential sexual availability. She had no choice about when she was summoned or by whom.
And the summonses were deliberately unpredictable.
Yes, which added this constant layer of psychological stress.
And the act itself was never called what it was.
Never. The victims were told they were being blessed by the god or chosen for divine favor, that they were bearing the god's sacred seed. This whole linguistic framework was just a flawless camouflage for the priesthood's absolute power.
It let the priests tell themselves they were serving a divine will.
It let them rationalize their cruelty. But we know what was really happening. The system produced children, and the records show punishments for virgins who resisted sexual contact with priests. The ritual language was the cover story for the continuous sexual use of girls for the political benefit of the priesthood.
So once a virgin became pregnant, She and the pregnancy itself became institutional property.
Right. They were often locked away in special secure chambers. The asset was being protected.
And the moment of birth is where the cruelty just becomes almost unbearable to think about.
It's the apex. The child was removed from the mother almost instantly, within hours, maybe a few days at most. And this immediate total severance of the maternal bond was absolutely essential to the system.
Why?
Because if the mother was allowed to bond with her child, the religious fiction, the story that the guide was the true parent, it would be impossible to maintain.
What happened to the children, the sons specifically?
The sons were the prize. They were taken and raised by the priests inside the temple. They were then presented to the public as divine children, proof of the temple's direct connection to the gods.
And they often rose to positions of power themselves.
Yes, some became high priests.
Oh.
And for that narrative to work, their biological mother had to be completely erased from the record. Her maternity was destroyed so the religious fiction could thrive.
And the daughters.
The daughters, tragically, were often funneled right back into the system. They grew up in the temple, were conditioned from birth, and entered servitude themselves. It was a self-perpetuating cycle.
How on earth did the system manage the grief of these mothers, having your child ripped away from you?
They had protocols for it. Protocols for crushing maternal grief. If a mother resisted when they came for her child, she was beaten. Immediately and severely.
And if she continued to grieve?
She was told she was committing a profound spiritual crime, dishonoring the god. In the most extreme cases of resistance, the system resorted to neglect or even poisoning. The political function of the child was the priority. The life or sanity of the mother was disposable.
And the very architecture of the temples reinforced all of this control.
The physical space was part of the prison. The inner chambers where the virgins lived were often designed like labyrinths. Maximum internal surveillance, minimum external access.
Doors locked from the outside.
Doors locked from the outside. Windows, if there were any, only looked onto internal courtyards. It was sensory deprivation. The sources suggest many virgins spent decades, 30, 40 years, without seeing the outside world or feeling natural sunlight, just trapped in this controlled twilight existence.
Which would compound the psychological trauma.
Massively. And the rumors of the few failed escape attempts and the horrific public punishments that followed served as a very effective warning to everyone else.
So let's talk about the core of that psychological control. It was a two-phase process, wasn't it? Destruction and then rebuilding.
Highly calculated. It's shockingly similar to modern methods of coercive control. Phase 1 was about breaking the person. It could last for weeks or months.
What techniques did they use?
Extreme isolation. No meaningful human contact. Systematic sleep deprivation guards making loud noises at random intervals all night so you could never reach deep rest. Ritual humiliation. And forced fasting. Just enough food to keep you alive, but not enough to be physically or mentally strong.
And the goal of all this?
To induce a complete psychological collapse. To make the victim so desperate for any kindness, any comfort, that they become completely pliable.
And that's when phase 2 begins, the rebuilding.
Exactly. Once a girl was broken, carefully selected older virgins or teachers, women who were themselves fully indoctrinated, would step in.
And they would offer comfort.
Targeted, temporary comfort, a kind touch, bit of extra food, and right after that comfort, the intense indoctrination would begin. They would explain the new ideology. Your suffering was a holy trial, a purification. It was proof of the God's love. To resist it was to reject the God.
So they create a psychological dependency on the very system that's torturing them.
It's a classic trauma bond. The mind, shattered by phase 1, gratefully latches on to the narrative from phase 2 because it gives meaning to the suffering. The system becomes both the source of pain and the source of salvation. And that is a huge part of why this could continue unquestioned for so long.
So as a temple virgin grew older, her value to the system, which was entirely based on her ability to reproduce, it declined.
Inevitably, her utility faded, and so did any protection she might have had.
Was there any difference in how they were treated?
If you had born sons who had risen to power in the priesthood, you might retain some minimal status, some security. But if you'd only born daughters, or if you struggled to conceive at all, your value just plummeted.
What was the end game for these women? What was their fate?
It was uniformly cruel. Some were simply released back into a world they hadn't seen in 50 years. No money, no connections, no skills, just abandoned.
Others were transferred.
Shuffled off to lesser roles in remote temples, out of sight, out of mind. And many were simply allowed to die from common illnesses inside the temple complex, receiving only the most minimal neglectful care. Their economic use was over.
The sources talk about the unrecorded death. What does that mean?
The official temple records were meticulous. They tracked the births of the divine children, the acquisition of new girls, but they contain this vast, purposeful silence when it comes to the deaths of many of these aged virgins.
They just disappear from the record.
They cease to exist. Nefertari's story ends this way. Her beauty faded, she was no longer useful, and she died. Unremarked, unrecorded, completely consumed. Her physical death was just the final step in an erasure that began with that bronze razor decades earlier.
And that silence in the historical record, it's the loudest evidence of all, isn't it?
It's the ultimate proof. If this had been an honorable calling, we would have their stories. We'd have memorials, biographies, last testaments. The complete and total absence of any surviving first-person testimony from a temple virgin herself confirms that their voices were deliberately and systematically suppressed.
And yet, even in the system of total control, there are these small, powerful stories of quiet resistance.
This is the critical counterhistory. The story of a woman named Takayat. She had been in the system for 20 years, she'd been beaten, she'd been confined, and she'd had 3 children taken from her. By all appearances, she was completely broken.
But she was doing something in secret.
An extraordinary act of countermemory. She secretly memorized the names, the birth dates, and the specific temple chambers where all the children born to virgins during her time were taken from.
She was creating an underground archive.
Yes, and she would whisper this fragile, dangerous history to the new girls, usually in the dark. It was this profound, defiant act against the state's control of memory. She was affirming that those children, those mothers, mattered. They weren't just divine offspring. They were individuals who were loved and remembered.
An act of human agency that could have gotten her killed.
Without question.
Today, millions of tourists walk through Karnak and Luxor. They feel that sense of awe at the architecture.
And the guides talk about pharaohs and gods and rituals. The reality of systematic sexual exploitation and child abuse is almost always omitted. We're taught to admire the beautiful hieroglyphs, but we have to understand that they are political advertisements. They are the propaganda designed to legitimize the cruelty that was happening just behind the sanctuary doors.
The impulse is to just admire the grandeur and ignore what it was built on.
But knowing what we know now demands more from us. We have to acknowledge that every magnificent stone was paid for by the consumption of thousands of young lives. The only justice we can offer them now is to refuse the sanitized version of history.
So the big lesson from all of this, from the Temple Virgin system, is that it has this enduring relevance. It shows how a great, sophisticated civilization, they didn't need crude tyranny to institutionalize profound cruelty.
No, they just wrapped it in the highest forms of religious authority and cultural tradition.
Yeah.
And we have to carry that forward, that understanding that good intentions or a claimed divine purpose can never justify exploitation.
Sacred language isn't a shield for abuse.
Not at all. Whenever any institution, religious or secular, argues that one group of people exists purely as a resource for another, it opens the door to this kind of dehumanization, the core ideology that drove this system. The idea that certain bodies are public property, that some people are just meant to serve others, that didn't die with ancient Egypt.
It just mutates, it adapts, it shows up again in modern systems of control and exploitation all over the world.
Which is why understanding the mechanics of this ancient machine is so crucial. It helps us recognize those same manipulative patterns today.
So when you look at those pictures of the towering stones of Karnak, you can feel the awe. But now you have a choice.
You can see the grandeur, or you can choose to look deeper. You can see the foundation built on thousands of destroyed lives.
The true act of justice, 3,000 years later, isn't just to marvel at the past. It's to actively refuse the comfortable narrative.
It's choosing to look at those erased histories, Nefertari, Takayat, all the others, and to affirm across that vast silence of history.
Your lives mattered. Your suffering was real. You deserved better, and we will remember.